So as I was thinking about the topic of identity this week, I came across a really interesting story. About a guy named Milton Lichtman. Has anybody ever heard of Milton Lichtman? Yeah, I did not either until this week. I don't know why you would have, but apparently in May 1989, New York Magazine published a feature story on him, and they gave him this title, A Man of a Thousand Faces. A Man of a Thousand Faces. See, he played over 3,000 roles in his career as an actor. And you've actually probably seen him without recognizing him, because for over 30 years, Lichtman's primary claim to fame was appearing in commercials as a really famous historical figure. So, for example, he lit a cigar as Fidel Castro in a commercial for lighters. He sold cars as Albert Einstein for a Southern California car dealership. He promoted a Minnesota savings bank as Abraham Lincoln. He touted an Arizona department store as Robert E. Lee. In fact, for one bank commercial, he portrayed 4 different historical figures, all complaining about other banks that charge for checks. He helped pitch cereal as Alexander Hamilton, beer as Johann Sebastian Bach, early mobile phones as Dracula, a cough syrup as Frankenstein. Among others, he did Babe Ruth, Gandhi, Mozart, Sherlock Holmes, Ebenezer Scrooge, John Wayne, Thomas Jefferson. On and on and on it went. In fact, in the interview, he was asked this question. He was asked how he was doing. And he replied, "I'm alive, I'm well, and I'm living in someone else's face." Now, by the end of his career, he had reportedly played 3,372 historical notables, and he passed away at age 87 in 2014. But at the end of his life, he made a really interesting comment, and I want you to think about this today. His comment was, "Heaven for me is to lie in bed stark naked with no costume, living in my own face and not someone else's, and luxuriate in my own skin." Now, I think that's a pretty profound statement, because this man spent his whole life portraying someone else, but he longed just to be himself and know who he was. Can you relate to that? You're listening today, and you're probably not an actor, but we all play different roles in our life. Parent, employee, child, church member, committee member, student, American, brother, sister, cousin. I could go on and on and on. Sometimes you're trying to be something for someone else, and you've done all that hard work, but you haven't done the hard work to actually stop and look in the mirror and ask the most important question, who am I? Who am I? That's the identity question, and that's a question we all need to answer. Author Kathy Cook says this in her book, 5 to Thrive. She says, we all need to know who we are. It's a legitimate need wired into us by God. And it's a necessary component to growth in the Christian life. The problem is that too often we build our identity on someone else's expectations of us. And when we do that, we can easily create 1,000 faces if we're not careful. How do you do that? Well, I think the typical person tries to build their identity on a few different areas. And so I brought some personal items with me today to help illustrate this. This right here, which you can see on the screen, is a picture of my great-grandmother with my great-great-grandfather in Brooklyn, New York, because I learned a few years ago that my great-great-grandfather actually owned an ice cream parlor there. Apparently the best ice cream parlor on the block. And then later on, my great-grandmother, she moved to New Jersey. She started a family, and the rest is history. This was part of my family identity. We get identity from family, right? Another area where we get our identity is our abilities. Our abilities. When I was younger, I played baseball, and so I brought a baseball glove here today, which actually was my father's. And I've spoken about this before, but baseball was a big part of my family growing up. So my abilities and my family kind of came together, and that formed a part of my identity, something I built it on. A third area could be interests, and so what I have here today, this is actually an award I won for a play that I did in high school out at the Bucks County Playhouse. And when I was younger, theater and performing in that was something very much that I built my identity on. It was what I was known for. And then the last thing I have right here is my diploma from seminary, because like many of you, I build a lot of my identity on my career in ministry. And I'm not sure I'm not the only person that does that. And so when people ask you who you are, it's hard not to direct your answer to what you do for a living, for your work, because we invest so much time in that. All of these things represent pieces of our identity. Now, on pages 63 and 64 of your workbook, there's actually a fill-in-the-blank activity to help you think this through, and so I really encourage you to do that in your small groups or at some point this week. Because the point I'm making is this. We're all going to answer the identity question. What we owe it to ourselves is that we should know how we're doing it and what the things are that we're using to answer it. Because often we find our identity in what we do, not simply in who we are. But when you look at Scripture, God defines our identity by just who we are first, and then the actions flow from that. So our memory verse for this week is 1 John 3:1, which captures this truth really well. It says this, see what great love the Father has lavished on us that we should be called children of God. That's what we are. If you've been around, that's a familiar verse. Have you meditated on that? Because John says, first and foremost, if you know Jesus Christ, you are a child of God. That's who you are. And then the way you live, it flows from that truth. But so often we find our identity in reverse by what we do rather than just who we are. Who are you? Now, the further answer